Welcome back to Truck Tech, everyone. There is a lot of money pouring into infrastructure for electrification, for trucks to be purchased and things like that. We've certainly discussed some of those subjects in the past, and we'll do it again. We're going to do it today with our guest Salim Yusaveda, who is the CEO of WattEV out in California. WattEV is pretty interesting on a couple of fronts. We're going to talk with Salim in a moment. But, one of the things they've done really, really well is bring in money. They spend a lot of other people's money, not through sort of capital raising, but we'll get into that in just a moment. Right now, let's welcome Salim to the show. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah. Hey, listen. We've had a chance to talk a number of times. I think most recently, just a couple of months ago, when you announced the opening of of your first facility, your first infrastructure site in the Port of Long Beach, and that one actually came a little ahead of what you expected, I think. But I think it's really important that we frame up kind of your way of going to market with what you do. You've got a lot of grant money, a lot of vouchers for trucks. You've obviously done a good job there. Explain how you managed to do that. I think.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, there's no doubt that infrastructure as well as the trucks are expensive, and we try to couple the money that we get as much as possible with grants. So, I mean, we have been very successful in getting grant funding, both state and federal grants for infrastructure as well as truck funding. But there is also a big portion of match share that we put in ourselves. We have raised about 30 million to date through sources of capital, including seed, private capital, and soon to be Series A that we've been working on. But really, I mean, we rely pretty heavily on grant infrastructure funds to reduce the cost of capital as much as possible, and we've been pretty successful doing it.
Yeah, you have. I think you told me when I first met you a couple of years ago that you had about $20 million in grant funding. I imagine that's gone up quite a bit. What's your current number?
We're pretty close to about 60 million now. So we've
That's amazing.
raised quite a lot more. We recently announced a $34 million grant in Sacramento, where we're building a site similar to Bakersfield, but on a much larger scale. So that's 120 acres or so that will have solar, as well as well over 100 charging stations for trucks, as well as a visitor center to really raise awareness for what we're doing.
Yeah, somehow you've gotten a lot of people's attention though, Salim, because it feels to me like WattEV has kind of burst onto the scene as a major player. And I remember coming to that first news conference at the ACT Expo, and I guess it was probably 2022, I believe, when you were introduced, and you had an opportunity to sort of explain what you were doing. The truck as a service space, you've done that with comparatively few resources. As far is there sort of a bit of a pinch me feeling going on at the company right now?
Absolutely. I mean, we've, again, as mentioned, had a tremendous amount of success early on, and we are still a fairly new company. We were founded in 2020 and have made tremendous amount of progress in the way. I mean, when we initially started, we started with the goal of being a main infrastructure provider for the transition that we all can say has without a doubt is coming now, right? I mean, there's no doubt that it's a matter of when, and it's happening now, not a matter of if. And we want to be the main infrastructure provider for that, but really evolved our business in the process to add and make trucking a lot more affordable and easier for owner operators that make a huge portion of the industry. And that's where we came up
Right.
with the truck as a service concept.
Yeah, we'll get to the Pony Express in a minute, but I have to ask one more question about sort of the grant
Mm.
funding that you're getting. Who do you know? I mean, somebody at your place must know somebody because you know this just doesn't happen organically, right?
I mean, we bang on doors and make noise to get it done, right? We've worked with a number of consultants. Mightycom GNA has been a huge help to us early on, opening up the doors, making connections. But really, I mean, we've also built up our team significantly on the grants, and again, it's just a matter of banging on doors and making leaps in progress.
Yeah. How much of the what I call hand holding is WattEV doing with fleets and so forth? At this point, I think you would. I'm guessing you would prefer to do to just go ahead and provide a truck for them as to help,
Mhm.
say, a fleet get trucks on their own. Are you involved in that portion of things as far as the
Yeah,
consultative activity?
absolutely. I mean, there's still a good amount of hand holding going on in different aspects, right? So if you look at just the grant aspect alone, so in order for an owner operator to get into an electric truck, there's various grants that they apply to. For instance, there's HFIB as well as
Mhm.
ISEF, which is targeted towards the smaller fleets. But for an owner operator to qualify, they have to have a minimum amount of revenue per year as well as a minimum fleet size. And once we get them into that, that gives them the voucher where we work with the dealers to get the vehicles. But also, we want to guarantee that they can drive that truck successfully, meaning that we have sufficient charging within our network to satisfy the routes that they have. So we work very closely with them to identify the routes, and oftentimes work closely with the shippers to bring in new routes onto the platform that we can give to those owner operators. So there's
Right, right.
quite a bit of handholding that still goes on until we reach to a scale where mass adoption happens.
Yeah. In your run on Less Electric Depot video, you said that truck as a service actually came up after you planned your first depot in Bakersfield. You've also described that as the Pony Express approach that you're taking with
Mhm.
TAS. We'll just call it TAS here among friends. Is this a hedge or is it an integral part, integral to the Watt EV business model?
Yeah, so I mean, when you look at the reason why we created Truck as a Service, it's because we didn't want there to just be sites that go without demand, right? So we want to, in a way, create the demand ourselves. And we started looking at the trucks and the limitations that they have in terms of the high price, the range limitations, the weight constraints, and so forth, and wanted to come up with a solution that gives owner operators access to electric trucks at a much more affordable uh, price. And long term, if you go 10, 20 years out, I would say that the price of the trucks are low enough where we don't need truck as a service to exist anymore. Owner operators should hopefully be able to go and purchase those trucks themselves, being able to hopefully use megawatt charging at a much faster rate to come in and do opportunity charging. But in the earlier stages where we have those constraints, there definitely is a lot more handholding needed to prime that market. And so early on, especially now, truck as a service is sort of an integral part of the business.
Right, but you do see it as a transition kind of thing, or transitory, and I know that I'm really interested to hear more on megawatt charging in a moment because I think you've talked about it from the very beginning. You know that
Mhm.
we're not there yet. I think other than Teslas, there's really nobody that can even come close to charging at that rate. But it's something that you're looking at. We'll get to that in just a moment. I want to ask you too, though. You mentioned Sacramento before I could bring it up, but this 34 million that you received to build that out, is that
Mhm.
on land that you've leased or did Watt EV purchase that land?
Yeah, so WattEV actually doesn't own any of the properties. We enter into lease agreements on all of our sites. Some of those sites are going to be privately owned, some of them are city owned, but on all of them, we enter into lease agreements. And
Okay,
that,
so
that
you're an
allows us to sort
operator.
of free up, correct. I mean, that allows us to free up some of our capital and focus it mostly on development and infrastructure rather than land acquisition.
Sure. Yeah, because a lot of the competition is doing, I just wrote a few weeks ago about, I guess you'd call it kind of a land grab that's underway. You're familiar with
Mhm.
it. Some of the, I guess we'll call them competitors because they are competitors really that want to
Mhm.
do what you're doing, but they
Yeah,
want to buy and develop the sites. You're doing site development though. You're actually working with utilities and the other players
correct.
to get these sites ready. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And it is
So
still sort of a land grab for us, but really, I mean, we want to put a lot of our capital to actual infrastructure development rather than site acquisition.
right. Let's talk about that for a moment. When you put chargers in at this point, you're looking at vehicles that can charge it up to about 250 kilowatts thereabouts. but it's not going to be too long till we
Mm.
see the next generation of trucks that presumably would be operating, at much higher charging rates. How do you have this mapped out in terms of when and which kind of charging you want to put in?
Sure. Yeah. So WattEV has always been um, an advocate of megawatt charging, right? So if you look at the trucks today, they are limited in their charge rate, where you have the fastest truck can typically charge about 350 kilowatts, which still translates to about a 2 to 3 hour charge time. Now, when you look at a diesel truck operator, they'll typically spend 30 to 45 minutes at a truck stop and then be back on the road. So there's that gap of where we are today and how do we get it to a typical truck stops 30 to 45-minute range, and that's where megawatt charging comes in. So in order for us to bridge that gap, I mean, we sort of have our own internal charging equipment through Charge America, which is a subsidiary of WattEV that has created charging equipment that works with both current technology on CCS and is already future-proofed with megawatt charging. So we do have uh, this technology being added to all of our sites, where it's true dynamic charging between 240 kilowatt CCS chargers as well as a megawatt charger. So this allows us to accommodate both current technology as well as be ready for megawatt charging. Now, the biggest limitation that we see is on the vehicle side, right? I mean, we have developed the megawatt charging equipment ourselves. We see that viable, and it's going through the certification process right now. The limitation that we see is on the truck manufacturer side, and for them to make that leap from you know manufacturing CCS capable trucks to jumping over to megawatt charging, and that to them, they need to see that demand, and for us, we're sort of priming that market, creating that demand ourselves and pushing those OEMs in that direction.
How do you see that playing out? Because it seems that this is not something that would happen organically. And I know Daimler Truck put a
Mm,
megawatt charger in up at Electric Island. You've probably visited there
right.
and seen it. And I know that was where Charon
Mm,
uh,
mm,
did its event last October, I think. But here's the thing: to get to that point, I mean, right now we're still at early adoption with all kinds of hockey stick charts out there that show it growing exponentially. But what about that move to megawatt? What are you doing? What can you do to encourage that?
yeah. So again, on the infrastructure side, all of our sites are built with the future in mind. So we do have both CCS as well as megawatt charging. But again, on the truck manufacturing side, you already are seeing some adoption, right? As you mentioned, Daimler has an MCS at their Charge Island, and they have also been testing a vehicle that has an MCS connector in Europe. Really, though, when you look at the U.S. market, the main players, their bread and butter is still selling diesel vehicles. So how do you get an industry to shift from that mindset of selling diesel trucks to going to megawatt charging vehicles, and sometimes skipping CCS if they haven't even done CCS vehicles, and that is plays a huge challenge. But really, that's where the market needs to go to get to that mass adoption, and we see that really happening in 2025, 2026 timeframe.
Well, it's easy to always go back to Tesla because I think they charge at about 750 right now on their megawatt chargers.
Mm,
But they're the only ones really, and they did skip the whole CCS thing, right? I mean, they
correct.
decided that there was a better way to go, and from ground up, and I think that's really, I guess, my understanding is that the next generation of these trucks, of electric trucks, will in fact be more or less designed for this, right? I mean,
Mhm.
this is, or will there be, from what you understand, an interim step even before you get to MCS?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Tesla, they weren't plagued with that legacy mindset, right? I mean, they didn't have any diesel vehicles to work with. They just went from a ground up build and asked themselves, how do we get to, the fastest charge rate to get as close as possible to a traditional truck rest break? And they were, for the most part of the Charin organization developing the megawatt charger. But I think right now they're using an earlier version of that, and it's yet to be seen whether they go to the latest standard on the MCS connector. But again, I mean, a lot of the other manufacturers are also committing to megawatt charging. It's just a matter of when they will get there. And that again comes down to really priming the market and pushing those manufacturers in that direction sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think this might be the first time that we've talked that I really understood kind of your pathway, if you will. That is, I'm going to review here. Correct me if I've got it wrong, but that you would do ultimately a transition of truck as a service, and then eventually, when we can match the amount of time at a truck stop or
Mm.
wherever that a diesel truck takes, you'd be willing to step back from that and just use these megawatt chargers, and that would be the future rather than steady state.
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at current technology, that 2 to 3 hour charge time is for opportunity charging for the most part a deal breaker, right? I mean, the last thing you want is someone to come in and wait 2 to 3 hours during an opportunity charge. So really early on, we're working very closely with owner operators as well as with the shippers to create schedules that match those timeframes, so that we can really get the best use of that vehicle given the constraints. Now, as the prices of these vehicles come down and the charge times are also coming down, that's when we see opportunity charging becoming more viable, where you don't have to really work so much on the scheduling. They can now just show up at the site, charge very quickly, and then be on their way again.
So, since we are in the early days of infrastructure development, especially for trucks, how important are stopgap measures like energy storage on site, mobile charging, things like that? I think you indicated you were using some mobile chargers at Long
Mm,
Beach
yep.
while you're getting finished.
Yeah, it becomes increasingly important. On the battery storage side, obviously, you want to avoid the peak times. That's where energy is oftentimes more expensive. So having some sort of battery storage can help reduce or shave off some of that peak hours. And then on the mobile chargers as well, that we do see becoming viable in some areas where it may take longer to actually put the chargers into the ground. Now, again, going back to the battery storage, as mentioned, some of our sites are going to have solar and battery storage and be somewhat independent from the utilities. So, if you look at Bakersfield or Sacramento, for instance, these sites are going to have over 25 megawatts of solar capacity. Now, these sites were sort of modeled after a traditional truck stop where you can do 200 truck fuelings per day, and so having 25 megawatts of solar allows us to have sufficient amount of solar capacity, at least during the daylight hours, to charge that at those rates. And then that helps us also become more or less tied to the utilities, as well as reduce the total cost of energy.
It also brings you a little closer to this idea of being able to do opportunity charging for some of the fleets. And, we write a lot about behind the fence private charging depots that are multiplying really. They're all around you, Long Beach, or kind of around you. But you
Mm,
suggest that even those that operate as intended, whether it's, 32
mhm.
chargers or 26 chargers, whatever, that there will still be some opportunity charging needed. Is this something that's just kind of around the edges for WattEV, or do you see maybe an opportunity of making that a bigger deal?
Yeah, so when you look at a lot of the big players that have their own locations, the larger carriers, most of them are eventually going to add chargers at their facilities for behind the fence charging. These are the larger carriers that have purchased their own trucks. But the majority of the industry is made up of smaller owner operators, and these are carriers that don't have access to infrastructure, or don't have the capital means to build the infrastructure themselves. And for these customers, opportunity charging in places like WattEV definitely become crucial for them to get into electric truck charging. Now, when you look at those
But you've
larger carriers, also that have, yep,
No, I'm sorry, I
when you
didn't
look at,
mean to
yeah,
interrupt, but you've got to basically have the availability for them, because the first time they wait an hour to get to a charger is probably the last time they do it, right?
correct, yeah, and that's sort of why we've created this valet service where they can come in with their passenger vehicle, park their car, get into a one of their trucks, and then go on the route and then come back. And really, it becomes more of a scheduling challenge where we work with them to identify schedules for them to come in and out. And then as the charge rates become faster, opportunity charging becomes a lot more viable rather than the scheduling challenges that we face today.
Yeah. There's another issue that has been in the news quite a bit recently, and I don't, I covered recalls for many years at General Motors, and I'm pretty familiar with how that whole thing works. And not that recalls are not serious; they're very
Mm,
serious. But we have seen now a couple of instances, and they both involve products that you're using, the Volvo VNR Electric for battery replacements because of potential fires, and the Nikola,
mm.
with the tray because of the apparently a coolant leak, also under recall. How are you dealing with that, especially in these early days? I know Nicholas said it's okay to keep the trucks on the road. I presume Volvo has told you the same thing. How are you adjusting?
Yeah, so for the most part, we are still able to operate the Nikola trucks that we have. We are doing a lot of battery health diagnostics to make sure that we are monitoring everything on those vehicles to make sure that they are still safe to drive. And then Nikola is also working closely on swapping out any parts that need to be swapped on any vehicles that seem unfit to drive. But for the most part, we haven't had any of those issues yet, and we have still been operating the trucks um, as normal. And then on the Volvo trucks, we also have faced delivery delays because of some of those recalls that you mentioned. I mean, in total, we've got 87 Volvo trucks that we're waiting for still. And,
Mm.
you know, the Volvo still wants to make sure that those trucks are safe and eventually they will deliver. We do have a reservation for Tesla as well, and they're also a manufacturer that won't commit to a delivery timeline. Eventually, we know we will get delivery of those trucks. But yeah, I mean, again,
Yeah.
safety is our number one issue, and we want to make sure that we give our customers a safe product. And we've been monitoring all the vehicles very closely, as well as following up with all of those manufacturers to make sure that the trucks that we have are safe to drive.
Sure. I'm going to get you out of here on this one. I don't. I've never asked this question, so you're the first to get it, and that's the king for a day question. What one thing would you want to see changed as quickly as possible or immediately in this new area that you're now working in?
Yeah, so if you look at the industry, the biggest challenge, uh, well, there's multiple challenges. One of the biggest challenges is infrastructure and the time it takes to get infrastructure running. Right now, we actually have customers that are some of those larger carriers that are working on building their own sites, and have taken delivery of trucks, but still don't have the infrastructure in place to charge. So they're actually coming to some of our depots saying, "Hey, can we domicile some of our vehicles at your facility while we get ours up and running?" And infrastructure has been a huge challenge. And one of the things that we can help to expedite that is either on the permitting side or on the utility side. The utility side, they do have incentives and programs to put infrastructure in place, but those still take quite a lot of time. And one area that you can improve that, for instance, is a lot of the engineering work that they do um, can be outsourced or can be taken upon the own company, right? So if WattEV can come in and say, "Hey, if I do the infrastructure or if I do the engineering ourselves, would it help speed up the process for you guys?" And that is one process that we are working closely with the utilities to see if it's viable, where we can do some of the engineering work ourselves to help reduce their workload and help speed it up.
Well, so I guess what you're saying is you'd like to be able to say, "Here's my tools. Here am I. Can I do this?" That's sort of the answer.
Absolutely. I mean, so some of those utilities do, for instance, the single line diagrams themselves, or contract a portion of it out, but it can take a significant amount of time to get those results back. And WattEV has the sourcing in-house to be able to do that themselves. So for the most part, we can come in and do the engineering work, submit it to SCE, get that final stamp of approval, and that speeds up the process significantly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good. So if you're king for a day, that's what you want to do, basically.
Though that's one of them. That's definitely one of
Well,
them.
unfortunately, we don't have any more time to hear any others. But you think about it for the next
Yep.
time we talk, and you give me your other wish list. Listen,
Sure.
Salim, thanks so much for being here on the show today. I really appreciate it, and we will catch up with you down the road. Okay.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Alan.
Okay, folks, we're going to wrap up today. Just a reminder that Truck Tech is coming to you via the FreightWaves YouTube channel. You're watching it live now, but you can go back and you can get previous episodes by going to the FreightWaves YouTube channel, click on shows, and then Truck Tech, and you'll get a whole playlist, and you can watch. I guess it's 30 episodes, but you may not want to watch that many. In any case, we really appreciate having you here. We hope you'll check that out, and we'll see you next time.